Shalom. Welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. As you know, these podcasts are designed to explore some of the impacts of longevity and the change that are taking place within our Jewish community and within our families within our community. So we thank you very, very much for joining us. Please check out the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and we appreciate your support because on that website, you're going to find a very conveniently located donate button. And if you'd like to support these podcasts, just click on that donate button, follow the prompts. It's really, really easy. So thank you very much. We are very pleased to welcome a colleague of mine, Rabbi Jon Cutler, to today's Seekers of Meaning to discuss a brand new project in his series of podcasts. And this podcast project, etc., is called The New Jew Podcast. Yes, you heard that right. The New Jew Podcast. As an old Jew.
Both of us, which is old.
As an old Jew, I thought AI was going to replace this, but no, Cutler is going to replace me. So, John, how are you? Nice to see you.
Fine. How are you doing? Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. We go back a long way.
Oh, I'm old.
Well, but we go back to the 70s.
Yes, I think I remember the 70s. Yeah. Yes.
You remember the 70s? We actually went to Camp Harlem and we did a program there.
Well, I started working at Harlem in 1963. So
yeah, there you go.
So one of the reasons why I moved back to take the job as the regional director was because the camp ran out of my office and turned out to be a very, very long and still going on. My grandchildren are there. So talk to me about the New Jew Podcast. What is this? Is this a podcast with just brand new Jews or young Jews? No old Jews allowed? What is this?
You and I'm going to speak on your behalf, have really seen how the Jewish community in our generation changed dramatically to the point that I would even say not necessarily in a better way, but changed dramatically that I personally am concerned about the future and the sustainability of the Jewish people. Let me start with this. That's saying that Judaism for me, and I can maybe even speak for you, is that a very essence and core being of who I am as a person. How I interact with the world, how I make decisions in the world, how I structure even my time, daily, weekly, monthly. Shabbat becomes central to my life. Even Tisha B'Av, I can't imagine not doing, fasting, and going to services. And with my husband, which we've been now together is 25 years, Judaism is central and meaningful to both of us. And that's part of us what keeps us together. The centrality of Judaism as a way of life, as a purpose. And I'm going to use that term purpose. So it comes down to this. I'm retiring June 30th from my congregation after 45 years of being a rabbi. Hence, old, or I would say elder. And I've come to this conclusion, I'll just be right frank with it. The Jewish community, in order to sustain itself, needs to seek out, and I even use the word recruit, non-Jews to become Jewish. This is the forbidden, right, topic in Judaism. Oh, we don't seek converts, But what I'm saying is, and dare I say it, missionize for those who want to actively become Jewish. So hence the purpose of the podcast, which I've been working on for 2 years now with John Argamon. He is also a co-host with my podcast. He himself originally was not involved in Judaism, but is a seeker now. And he's a member of Cult Tzedek, and he's a friend of mine. And we put together the New Jew Podcast through Amazon and Apple. And I'd like to thank your podcast, producer Steve as well. That's where we got connected here. And now we have 6 podcasts, doing 2 more, interviewing non-Jews who became Jewish and why they became Jewish. So, and the other thing I like to plug too is that the New Jew is starting to take traction. That at Road of Shalom on April 7th, we will be having a discussion which is open to the public. All are welcome to attend April 7th at 7 p.m. to discuss this whole idea of bringing non-Jews into Judaism.
Okay, so that's Road of Shalom in Philadelphia.
Correct.
If you're living in Billings, you probably won't be able
Thank you. Right.
So let's talk about the proselytization, and because I'm also in the minority of saying I think we really should. But let's talk about what's really happening as well now. There's a lot of people who are saying, with so much anti-Semitism, why do I need this? So how are you juxtaposing dealing with this obvious rise in anti-Semitism, and some of it, as you know, as everybody knows, quite violent, with his desire to open the door?
If we say to a non-Jew and say, oh, look about anti-Semitism, I gotta be frank, we're infantilizing them. They have the choice. They understand what the world is out there. And I've worked with over 300 converts. And I'm working with, every week in my congregation, we do a basic Judaism class with anywhere from 8 to 20 potential converts. And we discuss this. And they say, I still want to be Jewish. I understand what the consequences are. So I leave it up to them. I'm not going to discourage them. If anything, I will encourage them.
So how do you deal with the tradition? You know, people, our colleagues on the traditions as well. Somebody comes, I want to convert to Judaism. We're supposed to discourage them several times before. How do you operate within that context, or is that?
I don't.
Okay.
I say, you want to learn about Judaism? Come into my class. And then they, through the process of learning, they then come to the decision if they want to convert. I give them the opportunity. I open up the doors for them if they want to convert to Judaism. The other thing, too, I really want to talk about is that we're at a crisis point in America, Judaism. We're in a transition. Institutions are disappearing. You and I know that, being congregational rabbis and being part of the URJ, is that we're seeing synagogues closing left and right. The community is aging out. And what I found very discouraging in my 45 years is that the lack of generations coming back to institutions, our traditional institutions. What I found is a tremendous indifference. And I really like to share two stories here. One, and this is really parallels what I'm talking about. The first story is a young man that I worked with, and I'll call him, Ben. That's not his real name. But Ben was a member of my previous synagogue. I've known him since he was like 5 years old. He went through the whole system, education system. I did his bar mitzvah ceremony. I did his confirmation. I did the parents, grandparents' funerals, and I was an integral part of his life. He comes to me ready to marry, and he says, I'd like you to officiate at my marriage, even though my fiance is Catholic. And I do interfaith marriages, provided that they'll raise their children Jewish. And I said, are you going to raise your children Jewish? And I know him for like 25 years now. And she says, no, we decided to raise our kids Catholic. And then I said to him, look, Ben, the reality is what you have now done is you made a decision to end Judaism for hundreds and hundreds of generations. And I can't be part of that. To me, that is an example of where we are with Judaism. That's an extreme example. But what I really found in the Jewish community is a lot of indifference among younger Jews. It's religion in general in America.
You see, it's interesting because I have to actually disagree with you.
Okay.
I've run interfaith marriages since I was ordained. When I worked for the union, I was there at the beginning of Alex Schindler's of Blessed Memories outreach program, and we ran a huge outreach program when I was in the region. And the overwhelming majority of interfaith couples that I have married, because I did the same stipulation, came to the conclusion that we're here because we are going to raise our children as Jews.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm not interrupt, but I have no problem doing interfaith marriages, provided they raise their children Jewish.
But I have not found people in all the 50 some years of these marriages that I've done, I found a more welcoming perspective that they're sitting in my office in front of me saying, no, we are going to raise the children as Jews. I think.
No, you and I are in agreement, because I found the majority of interfaith marriages I do, which is now the majority. I rarely do a Jewish wedding now,
really, which
says a lot in itself. But the majority of Jews that I do interfaith marriages are determined to raise their children Jewish, and kol hakavod.
Well, let me ask you about this, what I call also the age of transition, because we are in the process of creating a new American Judaism. And that's okay, because we've always created new Judaisms. That's how Judaism has survived. It's survived because it never stood still. But 4 or 5 times in our history, it's innovated an entirely new Judaism. And I think we're in the process of doing that right now. And yes, the institutions that we were raised with are in the process of radical transformation and sometimes disappearance or sometimes reinventing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But as I travel and as I talk to colleagues and congregations, I was just at a congregation that's booming. Yeah, they're booming. When you go to RS, Jill has done a superb job. Yes, there's some congregations in certain communities that are in transition and some of them going away and some of them merging. But what I'm finding is younger people are redefining what community means. So from your experience in developing this program and the podcast and this message of openness, proselytization, where do you see the role of technology in the creation of just new types of communities? Because I see this happening all over the country.
Right. Exactly. If we're in a transition, then the fact is, why don't we think outside the box? And it comes down to this, and I'll give you the other story. But first, it comes down to a very important idea. Then why not rethink of bringing Jews, non-Jews into the Jewish community? I'm talking about seekers. I'm not talking about necessarily going like the Mormons and knocking on the door and handing out pamphlets that say, do you want to be Jewish? What I find the most difficulty is that, I'll give you an example. It's best, okay? There was a man called Dominic. He literally showed up on Yom Kippur services, non-Jewish, Polish background, and Yom Kippur in my synagogue. I'll never forget, he stood in the back of the synagogue, not knowing anything going on. And then after services, he came up to me, he says, I'd like to talk to you about converting to Judaism. So the next week we met, and he was telling me that he and his wife and 4 children were doing a do-it-yourself Judaism. And I said, why? And they said, because we found Christianity lacking. They were Catholic, again, originally from Poland. And now they're saying, we want something meaningful in our lives. Richie, I have found consistently with everyone that I have worked with who want to be Jewish, it gives meaning, structure, purpose to their lives.
Correct.
It helps to define who they are as human beings, how they engage in the world. So my point, in agreement with your point, is that if we're at this transition, then break out of the old paradigms and create a new paradigm of welcoming those who are seekers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be non-Jews, anyone who is seeking. Now, this is what it's inherently the problem of institutions. When you look at those who want to become Jewish, they just happenstance, and I use that word not lightly, happenstance come across a synagogue. So for example, I have now within my own congregation converted 20 or 30 for a small synagogue people. And the question is, how did you find Beth Israel? Oh, we passed by, okay? And they literally, I'm not kidding, they literally knocked at the door or they just showed up for services. So I'm thinking, if these people have the courage and tenacity to come and knock on the door of a synagogue because they're seeking Jewish, Kal v'chomer, how many more so of those who really are seeking but are too intimidated, don't have the means, or don't even know how to even start looking to be Jewish. And they can't be Jewish because there's not a process or safe space for them to become Jewish. This is the purpose of my podcast. If you're looking at after the people who I'm really trying to reach are not those who are actively seeking, who have the courage, the determination to become Jewish, but really reaching those who really want meaning in their lives. Because if Judaism is so important as it is for you and I, then this is a marketplace of free ideas, America. So how come we're not spreading the message of the wonders of Judaism?
So to the people, the hundreds and hundreds of people right now who are enrolled, just for the sake of argument, in the URJ Introduction to Judaism program, which is in many cases online, that's not the people that you're after. So you're after the people who have no attachment or may not even know what a synagogue is, but are looking for something.
And who are too intimidated. They pass a synagogue and say, I'm too intimidated. What do I do here, right? Do they have the courage to come and knock on the doors?
Are you putting up electronic billboards on expressways across the country saying, join, if you're looking for meaning in your life, join us, become Jewish?
So the point is, if the Jewish community is spending so much money on birthright, so I'm saying, can there be a similar type of program, which, and this is what it comes down to, it's two pieces to this. One is to create a structure, right, an organization, if you want to call it, that teaches, that mentors. And the most important piece to this is when I talk to rabbis, colleagues who do conversion classes, that's maybe the third priority, the fourth priority on the list after pastoral care, leading services, rituals, life cycle events, etc. So they're not necessarily putting the time, but to create a structure where you have nothing but those who are dedicated, Jewish educators or rabbis, to teaching converts, to teach people to be Jewish, to mentor them, to offer classes. And this needs to be a nationwide organization, a structure, so it's uniformed. And then the second piece is to actively advertise, social media. You know, you're familiar with Jews Belong, that Archie Gottesman, puts up on billboards. Similar idea. And I just came across last week a wonderful TV commercial called We Are Catholic. It's 30 seconds.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Put out by the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And if you did the same thing of saying, we are Jews, and give them an opportunity to really start investigating or wanting to learn about Judaism. And again, the central piece to all of this is having a organized structure that people can go to. That's number one. And the other thing about converts, which I really want to push, converts bring a new dynamic and a new life into Judaism. They bring hope. And what I found when I'm working with these families like Dominic, who eventually did convert, not only did he and his wife convert, but his 4 children converted to Judaism. 4 children. And this is the third family that I've worked with in my career, where the entire family converts to Judaism. Those children, I know, will become Jewish, because it comes back to this piece, the sustainability of the Jewish people. And what converts bring is not just quote unquote numbers, but they bring a richness of vitality and hope to the Jewish people.
So when you're talking about the creating of a structure for your program, there's got to be an educational component. You just can't walk in and say, gee, I'd like to be Jewish today. Will you just convert me? So talk to me about the academic, for want of a better term, structure that you're thinking about in developing this project.
That's a great point. There definitely has to be an educational piece to this. What I'm actually looking is the larger picture. Is there an interest to think outside the box? Maybe, again, looking at Birthright as an example of looking for funders to really organize this. Look, all these Christian groups have missionary groups. I mean, being in the chaplain corps for the Navy for 32 years, I've always encountered like the Baptist Missionary Board. You have orders of priests in Catholicism who go out to proselytize. All Christian groups have some sort of missionary board. They've created this organizational structure. The Mormons are great at that too.
Are you saying that in the grand scheme of things, Rabbi Cutler wants to create cadre of, for want of a better term, Jewish missionaries who are going to go out into the field and proselytize and invite people who are seeking to explore and become Jewish?
No. I'm not going out there knocking on doors and having...
I'm not saying knocking on doors, just being present in communities.
Well, absolutely. Yes, correct.
Almost like...
But for liberal Judaism, exactly. For liberal Judaism, you hit the nail on the head. But because liberal Judaism is the one that's really hurting. Because, and Chabad, exactly, it's using that as a model.
So will these people, these emissaries,
let's say,
emissary, will they be clergy or will they be educated lay people who have the same passion of saying, I want to spread the word of the Torah and in a non-revelatory way, or are they going to be clergy? Because we both know really educated, passionate lay people.
Absolutely.
Who would.
And that's why I said earlier, I said rabbis or Jewish educators. But this is what I want to emphasize, really emphasize. That is their only job.
No, I understand that. I understand. I understand that. Pulpit rabbis right now are overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed, and they're facing their own crisis of burnout, and so let me to play this out locally. Have you had a conversation with another institution?
Yes, the institution I actually had conversation with was Word of Shalom Philadelphia. They, especially Rabbi Friedman, who will be on my podcast. That's what I'm thinking, like a birthright, not a model, but a birthright organization and funding to make it, national.
So I want to go back to one other thing, because we're finding this in our work, because I see a huge drive of creativity right now in the American Jewish community, despite all the antisemitism. There are more people studying Judaism now than ever before in the history of Judaism. More.
Correct. I found right.
The Zoom machine has made that possible. It's changed the way people are relating to Judaism and studying Judaism in very serious ways. Our young people, they a lot of times they'll get their Judaism out of this, and there's nothing wrong with that because there's lots of opportunities here. So you also see this organization that you want to create being embedded with social media, correct? Or yes or no?
I mean, it's a yes and a no question. Yes, on one level, okay, because that's how they get introduced to this. But the most important thing is really human-to-human contact, Jewish-to-Jewish contact. Because not only when I'm thinking about the structure to teach about Judaism, but to mentor, that these Jewish educators / rabbis, whoever they are, is to mentor them and teach them the practicalities of being Jewish. And then the third piece to this structure is integrate them into a Jewish community. In other words, if you're living in Omaha, to find out what the Jewish communities are, and for the mentor to personally introduce them to be the connector to these Jewish communities. So after you go through this program, you're not hanging out there, but the rabbi or the educator made the initial introductions to these various Jewish communities and saying, so-and-so is interested in becoming part of your community. And this also helps with congregations. For example, with my congregation, we have increased our membership mainly through converts because they come knocking on my door. But could you imagine that you have this national organization and now they're placing these new Jews, hence the new Jew, okay, into various communities throughout America?
So have you been in dialogue with a couple of the organizations that have sprung up in the last 20 years who also saw this as Ed Case's group and the 18 Doors group that also are actively engaged in welcoming, just like when we did the outreach program, which the outreach program of the Reform Movement restructured hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of congregations, and to this day is an amazing success. Have you been in touch with these other organizations that have put their foot into this river?
Yeah, I'm familiar with them, and I have been limited contact with such organizations. But again, what I'm looking for is you'll have to actively, as a non-Jew, seek these. But if it's out there on social media, if it's out there on billboards, if it's out there on commercials, and you had a national organization like 18 Doors, which is much more, structured, that's what I'm looking at.
Are you seeing any fear factor of saying, which both of us have heard in meetings in our careers, we really shouldn't do that. It'll call too much attention to ourselves. We'll just stay within our own community rather than go publicizing, join a synagogue or here's how to become Jewish.
Again, we're in America. It's a marketplace of ideas. if we have a message which we truly are committed to and believe in, then why aren't we marketing that? I mean, to me, that's what the fundamental piece is. Judaism is a central part of my life. To all those converts that I have worked with, it becomes a central part of their lives of how they identify in this world.
So, John, before we start running out of time, the New Jew podcast, where can somebody get it? And what do you do on one of these podcasts? Who do you interview? Or is it
like, for example, I interview a lot of the people who I've worked with who converted. I interviewed Dominic and his entire family and why their children, we want to be Jewish and remain Jewish and will continue to be Jewish. I have interviewed, I don't know if you know, Encouraging Judaism. It's a organization that Ellen runs and gives funding to. I've actually had a secular Jew on talking to a convert, but he finds, and this is one of the issues that I'm actually looking at, is identity versus meaning, where he identifies with the Jewish community as being a Jew, but he doesn't live as a Jew. And his adult children are not raising their children Jewish because it doesn't have meaning in their lives. So it's a variety of showing the value, showing people's lives. It's stories. That's the purpose of the podcast. And it can be found on Amazon. It can be found on Apple.
If somebody wanted to explore something more with you, how do they do that?
They can email me at thenewjewpodcast@gmail.com. So it's thenewjewpodcast@gmail.com. And if people want to come to the event on April 7th at Road of Shalom at 7 p.m. for the panel discussion, it is open to the public. They're welcome to do that.
Okay. Rabbi Jon Cutler. John, take care of yourself.
Thank you.
To all of you, thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We thank you very, very much for your time. And again, invite you to visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and that donate button. We do appreciate it. I also appreciate the genius of our producer, Steve Lubetkin, because Seekers of Meaning is recorded at the studios of Lubetkin Media in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Until we see each other again on the next Seekers of Meaning podcast, thank you very, very much for joining us. We do appreciate your time and your interest. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most of all, be kind to one another. Thank you. Shalom.